Well, hello everybody. It's Greg coming here from Good News for Israel, and we're taking 5 and Selah, which means to just take time and draw your attention to the Lord. Grab a coffee, get your Bible. Let's have a look at what the Lord is saying as we continue our journey through Genesis chapter 12, verse 7. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." We're at the point of the Battle of Jericho, and if you know the story, the children of Israel went into slavery and then came out with Moses, led by Moses, over 40 years, and then they crossed over the Jordan River at that just near the place of Jericho with Joshua. Joshua meets the commander of the Lord's armies, who gives him a battle strategy, and we're at that point. We've got a strategy. The very first city in the great conquest of this land is there, and now with the instructions of the commander of the Lord's armies locked into his mind, Joshua calls the very select group of priests and warriors that are going to perform this task and issues their special instructions to them. Let's pick up the story in Joshua chapter 6 and verse 6. And Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns," literally Sheva Shofarot HaYovelim, the 7 jubilee trumpets before the ark of the Lord. And then Joshua assembled the people and gave them their instructions. In verse 7 it says, "And he said to the people, Proceed and march around the city, and let him who is armed advance before the ark of the Lord." And then of course comes the Battle of Jericho, which is also known as the city of palm trees. So, and verse 8 says, so it was when Joshua had spoken to the people that the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns, Sheba, Shofarot HaYovelim, 7 jubilee trumpets before the Lord, advanced and blew the trumpets, Shofarot, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. The armed men went before the priests who blew the trumpets, Shofarot, and the rear guard came up after the ark, while the priests continued blowing the trumpets, Shofarot. Okay, so the men of war advanced before the ark. So the men of war went first, and the priests. Then came the 7 special priests blowing the 7 trumpets, and then came the ark of the covenant, and then came a rear guard of armed men. Now, I always pictured millions of people walking around the city. In actual fact, it was the men of war, the normal priests, the 7 special priests and their trumpets, the Ark of the Covenant, and then the rear guard of armed men, some more warriors. So let's pick up verse 10. Now Joshua had commanded the people, saying, "You shall not shout or make any noise with your voice, nor shall a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I say to you, shout," which is the word ruah, and then you shall shout, ruah. Okay, let's replay this day, the first day of this inverted commas battle, by going into the camp where the Israelites were. And where were they? They were in Gilgal. And on day 1 of this campaign, this is how the day would have gone. Everyone got out of bed. It was very exciting. The camp was all abuzz. They'd just crossed the Jordan River. It's day 1 of the campaign. The men of war are putting on their armor. They're taking up their weapons, and I'm sure they're talking to each other about what's ahead of them. The priests, of course, washed and put on their priestly gear, and they took up their trumpets. And then they went to the tabernacle, and they looked out, went in and took out the golden ark of the covenant with the mercy seat with the angels. That wouldn't have been done hurriedly. That would have been done, respectfully. And they all assembled and waited for Joshua's command, and then began the journey by foot from the camp in Gilgal across the few kilometers to Jericho with all of its palm trees. Becoming visible as they're getting closer, they're seeing the palm trees. It was around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about the average temperature at that time of the year. It was harvest time, so the barley was high and ready to eat, because we read that they ate of the land, and at that time of the year, that's the barley harvest. But with the approaching Israelites, a lot of the barley may have been harvested by the people, the Canaanites, and brought into the city to sustain the people of Jericho, because they were expecting perhaps a siege. Jericho had an internal water supply, so they were all set for potentially a year or more of siege. So Bible scholars have told us. The population of Jericho, which consisted of the city residents and of course all those Canaanites who normally were farmers, etc., around the surrounding land, they'd all come into the city for protection, and they were watching from the ramparts, especially as they saw the Israelite army approaching across the way from Gilgal. Then the great cohort of warriors and priests arrived at Jericho with Joshua and assumed all of their positions as the strategy said. And upon his order, they started their journey around the city of palm trees. As instructed, they all remained silent as the priests blew their trumpets. They all went around the city just once and returned to the point that they started at. And along the way, on the northern wall, they saw the scarlet thread draped out of one of the windows and understood that was the brave Rahab's house where her family would have been assembled. Now remember that Jericho was a maximum of 10 acres. As archaeologists have discovered, it's between 6 and 10 acres. But to say it's 10 acres, has a maximum circumference of about 805 meters, less than a kilometer, so about 2,600 feet. Now, this distance ordinarily would take an average person just wandering, just walking slowly, around about 10 to 15 minutes to walk. But with lots of men and trumpets and I suppose the overall significance of the battle, it could have taken, half an hour, could have taken an hour, but it wasn't a huge amount of time, all in all. Then, once they'd finished their circumnavigating the city, they began the walk back in a procession to their camp at Gilgal, to the surprise, I suppose, and confusion of the onlooking king, who was looking from the walls of Jericho, and all the residents were looking, and they're wondering what was going on here. And all these warriors and priests made it back home to Gilgal around about lunchtime. And the men of war got out of their armour, the 7 priests removed their priestly clothes and put the trumpets away, and returned, of course, the Ark of the Covenant to the tabernacle. And then they probably went off and told stories with each other and their families over lunch. The children would have been listening on in amazement. And we pick up verse 11, it says, So Joshua had the Ark of the Lord circle the city, going around it once. Then they came into the camp and lodged into the camp. On day 2 of the campaign, it was early to rise, breakfast, and then they went and repeated the whole process. In verse 12, Joshua rose early in the morning. The priests took up the Ark of the Covenant. Verse 13, the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns with Shavah, Shovarot, Ha, Yobalem, the 7 jubilee trumpets, before the Ark of the Lord, went on continually and blew the trumpets, Shofarot, and the armed men went before them. But the rear guard came after the Ark of the Lord, while the priests blowing continually the trumpets, which is Shofarot. And verse 14, and the second day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. So they did this 6 days. So it continued. Day by day, early to rise, breakfast, get dressed, get the weapons, get the trumpets, get the ark, get out of the city, get in formation. The armed men, the 7 priests of the trumpets, the ark, the rear guard. The men stayed silent. The priests blew the trumpets continually. And then after marching around the city once, each time noticing the scarlet thread hanging from that particular window, they returned to camp. And of no doubt that the people of Jericho were completely perplexed, confused, probably terrified. Rahab and her family were scared and excited, all at the same time wondering, is today going to be the day? But of course, in the 7th day, the routine's going to change. Instead of the normal once around the city, on the 7th day, on that day, it would be 7 times. A very different day indeed. And we're going to look at that next time. So how exciting to be involved in God's strategy. This is no ordinary strategy. There's a special strategy here, and it's all about Jubilee. And it's all about a whole lot of stuff because the special trumpets are being blown. But we're going to look at that next time. In the meantime, you have a wonderful day. I pray the Lord bless you. I hope you take time, just spend time with the Lord, just praising the Lord. Because if He's able to do this, what can He do in your life. Well, God bless you, and until next time, bye for now.